Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be doing a manga vlog. Before jumping into the actual reading and vlog portion of this, I do want to say a huge thank you to all of you. I do want to make these relatively recurring just to ensure that I keep up with manga. I stated before that I jump around between video games and TV shows and anime. There's just so many areas that I want to cover on this channel, but I do want to ensure that manga always has a place and that it doesn't get lost within all of the other stories that we talk about. I feel like manga vlogs would be a really fun way to keep up with manga, to really ensure that I am not falling behind with a lot of the stories that I want to continue on with, but also to ensure there's a place where all of us who do love manga can kind of geek out together. I do want to also make sure though that I'm going about this in a way that is something that all of you feel like you actually can geek out with me over and that I'm not excluding anybody. So I was kind of on the fence about, do I want to talk about spoilers? Do I not? What are your thoughts? And I also asked for your suggestions and in general, some stories that you recommend. So first and foremost, thank you so much for so many of your suggestions. And second, thank you so much for the feedback. A lot of you were saying you actually do really like when there are spoiler sections for a couple of different reasons, so long as it's a clear indication of this is when the spoilers start. Here are timestamps if you want to skip over. And something that I think is really interesting and fun is that for some of you, just hearing a general setup for a story isn't necessarily always the thing that hooks you. It's hearing about the spoilers and the things that occur within the story that you're like, oh, that sounds good. And that's not necessarily the kind of reader that I am, so that's just something I would not necessarily have thought of, and I'm really grateful that a lot of you are willing to take the time to share your thoughts and provide your input. So as I go through various different manga stories or different arcs, I am going to have spoiler sections, and then I will have sections where I kind of just give you an overview of what I have checked out and what I thought of it. Anyway, the things that we're going to be talking about today would be Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. I am kind of sticking with the fantasy manga currently. So Frieren, I do think that the manga in this is a lot faster to get through than what I checked out in the last manga vlog, which was Magus of the Library. Those take a little bit longer for me to get through, and thus I had only checked out 2 volumes in the previous manga vlog, and it actually worked out perfect because it was kind of like the end of an arc in that one. With Frieren, I'm picking up where the show left off, and I'm planning on reading 3 volumes. If I end up getting past that, then I'll get past that and I'll let you know what I end up picking up. But if I don't get past that and I just get up to volume 9, then we'll be looking at volumes 10 through 12 at a future date, a future manga vlog. But that is what I'm going to be checking out today. As always, I'll have clips of Luna Bear, who is the best part of any video that she's in. But anywho, we'll go ahead now and move on to actually reading some manga.
Is that a tickle spot? Oh, tickle. Luna. Oh.
I've officially read through volume 7, volume 8, and volume 9 of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And I'm a little sad because volume 9, I feel like we were finally getting into a slightly bigger plot line, and then we got cut off right as it was really getting into the meat of it. So I was tempted to jump straight into volume 10, but I wanted to give thoughts on these volumes up through this point. I do want to incorporate your feedback and have a spoiler section and then a non-spoiler section. So I'm going to start with spoilers. I'll have a timestamp. You can skip ahead if you just kind of want a general overview. And speaking of general overviews, if you are not all that familiar with Frieren, you are looking to hear a little bit more about it. For today, I do want to focus on the events within those volumes, but I have in the past done videos for the anime. I kind of went through sections of the anime, and then also I had a kind of overview of my thoughts for it, as well as an if you like this, try that. So I'll have my Frieren playlist linked in the description bar, but as noted, I'm going to stick to these volumes for today. What was really great is having officially picked up volume 7, I can state with certainty that it does indeed pick up right where the anime left off, season 1 of the anime. So it was nice because there's a tiny portion of overlap, which was perfect because I got a little bit of a refresher of where we left off, and then I was able to get into the events that transpire afterwards. And I'm so excited because I really liked a lot of what happened within this section. So getting into spoilers, as I stated, I'll get into general overview after, but getting into spoilers to start, this isn't the biggest thing that occurred within this. Of course, there's a combination of smaller arcs and then bigger arcs within Frieren. And when I say smaller arcs, I mean there's really, really small arcs within Frieren, like it's just a chapter plotline and then you move on. And I wanted to spend some time with one of the shorter ones because I think it speaks to how this story shows its characterization, and some of it's up for interpretation, of course, and I just feel like it really speaks to kind of how humans interact and how we are and how everything's not always cut and dry and just told to you, that sometimes we don't even understand our own behavior. And I think that was really true of what just kind of could have been seen as like a cute moment, but in actuality I think speaks to the things that I'm describing, which is the date between Stark and Fern. By the way, I watched the sub, but I've heard that if you watch the dub, they pronounce it more like Stark, where they have a sh sound in there. I'm going to say Stark, but I really apologize if I'm saying it either incorrectly or not as you're accustomed to hearing it. But anyway, within this little section, it just kind of feels like a cute little like, oh, Stark and Fern, they go on a date. Borderline fan service, because I feel like as we're reading through it, a lot of us are like, oh, just date already, right? With what we see earlier, that's like just the date already moment of the story. But I actually feel like this is an important moment for Fern and her character in general. So Fern is a very quiet, kind of reserved character, but she's very powerful and capable, but she does kind of keep to herself. And she doesn't necessarily, when it comes to Frieren, have... I don't want to describe it as a bad example of how to interact with others, because that's not true. Frieren is, she's not necessarily the same as a lot of people they interact with, but I don't want to categorize her as bad. She's just not somebody who is necessarily super social and really great at expressing herself. That's not what Frieren's role is as a mentor for Fern. So Fern has always, I think, had people who are very capable and who care about her. So she, I think, has this level of confidence with herself and she's comfortable with herself. But when it comes to expressing how she feels to other people, she has a tendency to just not express herself, and she accidentally slips into, I think sometimes, assuming other people know how she feels about things, and borderline being irritated when they don't, which isn't fair. And you've actually seen this happen between her and Stark a few other times throughout the story up to this point. So for this little date, she just kind of is like, okay, fine. And then Stark's kind of like, and he tries really hard because he's sweet and he seems like he genuinely always wants people to have a nice time. And so he puts in all this effort asking Frieren, like, where do you think Fern would want to go? What would she like? They go on their little date and she likes the things well enough, but she doesn't necessarily like love it, and it's fine. But then at the end, there's kind of this, like, she was really happy, and she was happy because it was peaceful and nice. But back to the idea of she almost seems to expect people to know how she feels. I think part of this is also because the people that she's had in her life really, really close to her have been parental figures, or at the very least they've been these mentor-like characters who are inevitably people that are making an effort to be soothing and comforting and kind and uplifting. And so she's accustomed to people putting in all that effort to be that way, and there is a safety that comes with having a really wonderful parental or mentor-like figure. But she hasn't really had a lot of people her own age and people who just interact with her as their own individuals who they're not fulfilling that role, but they still want to make her happy. And for Stark to have accomplished that feeling of peacefulness and comfort and safety, I think was really, really sweet and really lovely. I think she sees that he's putting in effort, but she does seem to have it in her mind that in order to be compatible and for her to enjoy herself, it's almost like he has to already know how she would feel and what she would like. And you see that earlier with the bracelet. Like, she seems to really want him to put in effort into discovering what she would enjoy and what she would like, but almost getting into a point of expecting him to already know without ever actually talking to him about these sorts of things. And so because he doesn't have these conversations where she's laid it out for him, he does try to go to the next best source, which would be the person who knows her better than anyone, which is Frieren. And so I just feel like it really shows the way that sometimes as people we just kind of have these unrealistic expectations, but then we sort of question and we ask ourselves, like, is this fair? And I think at the end of the day, seeing how much effort that Stark is putting in is really meaningful. And just in general, I feel like he's so precious. There's a reason he's my favorite, as he's just the cutest, sweetest little cinnamon roll of a character, and he tries so hard. But something I think is true for him as well is you see everywhere they go, Stark makes everybody happy. He makes the kids happy. He instantly seems to get along with everybody. And I almost sometimes wonder if there's like this jealousy with Fern of just she wishes that could be her. But then for him, it's like, I'm not accustomed to not being able to just make somebody happy. And so it's almost like bordering on like a challenge for him, which, as we've seen, is true of his character. He does find that he is his most heroic and capable when he approaches things. Typically you see this in the form of fights, but when he approaches things that sort of do make him scared. So I almost feel like that Fern brings out a side of him that really allows for him to grow. I just think their interactions are always adorable, and like I said, maybe some people would read that and just feel like it's just a cute little one-off, and they go on a date, aw, yay, okay, now on to the next thing. But I actually really thought that it showcased a lot of great character development, showing the characters for who they are without necessarily holding your hand and broadcasting it. And it was, I thought, very sweet and precious. Now, though, to the part of the story that I think was more of a bigger arc. There's, of course, a lot of smaller arcs, but one of the bigger ones is we're finally kind of seeing a return to fighting demons. And I really have thought, even though a lot of people disagreed with me, but when I was watching the anime, and you get to that one city, and Frieren is very much like, no, the demons, they only ever use language to deceive us. They aren't trying to reach some higher level of companionship with humans. They don't care about living alongside us. They just are what they are. You kind of see that once again reinforced through that arc. And at the time I thought, I feel like there is more to them, though. We just don't have enough information. We haven't been shown enough information of the demons, their culture, and everything that has transpired with them in the past. We haven't seen enough of it, but I just feel like there are outliers, or I feel like there are certain demons that don't operate the same, or there is some kind of hierarchy that we haven't gotten enough of. I have been eager to see that, and some people felt, and maybe this, if you're watching this is how you feel too, that actually what makes them more interesting is that they are just sort of instinct-based, that they're almost animal-like in the sense because they're just doing what they do to survive. There's not really ill intent. They're not malicious, and in some ways that makes them less evil than people because they're not even capable. They're just trying to do the things to live, basically. But I still have felt like, I don't know, I feel like there's something else there. I'm not saying that the story would be worse off if there wasn't, but I've just felt like maybe. And I feel like where we leave off with Volume 9 is implying that maybe there is more when you see this particular demon that it turned out was, first off, a mentor to a character. So that was kind of a reveal. So they were a mentor to a character. They seem like they're capable of utilizing the spells that other individuals use, not necessarily the ones that the demons would use. And they did coexist. So you're starting to get the backstory of this demon, and then we left off there with Volume 9. I'm like, I need more of this, though. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing more of this. But part of what I wanted to kind of extrapolate from this is I suppose you could call it a theory that I have. So much of the story has been exploring Frieren and the fact that because she is an elf rather than a human, and she lives for a very long time, that there was sort of this distance, there was this gap in, almost you could argue, her understanding of what it is to live and how that's different from how humans understand what it is to live. And now that she's kind of embarking on this journey that in some ways is an opportunity to reflect on the past, she's sort of having these moments where she can relive, but then soak it all in and really appreciate it. And then she can also kind of pass on this wisdom to this new generation. And there's so much about Frieren that's lovely. And I feel like these are the things that get talked about a lot. So I'm not going to necessarily spend all my time focusing on that. But I do think that you spend so much time analyzing how Frieren is starting to understand life through the lens of the short lifespan that humans have and how she's learning to appreciate things so much more. And I kind of feel like there's a hint of that with this particular demon. At the very end of Volume 9, you're seeing that they used to just kind of live the way they lived. They did operate borderline on instinct. And then you see them start to have this sort of curiosity piqued by these humans that they interacted with. And then they wanted to learn more. And I was like, is there a parallel between Frieren and this particular demon? But also, is there an opportunity for all of what Frieren is learning to then allow for her someday, and this would be the biggest hurdle for her because she has no tolerance for demons, would this allow for her to take what she's learned and overcome this biggest hurdle, which is to actually see some humanity potentially in demons? I feel like that could be really compelling and interesting. And if it doesn't go that direction, of course, that's fine. But I do wonder, I think that could be such a fascinating way to explore and really put to the test everything that Frieren has learned on this journey. I think that could be great. And it fits so well with like the Frieren Beyond Journey's End, because of course on surface level, it's like, well, we already defeated the big Dark Lord type of premise, and so now it's beyond that. But I think it could be also interesting to factor in beyond that, we are now like entering this new, where we're taking all of that beyond, we're going beyond this understanding that we have. I just think there's so much you could do with it, and I'm curious if maybe we're headed that direction. Maybe we're not. Maybe this is completely inaccurate, but if it played out, I think that given how much they have spent time on reflecting on what it is to live and the beauty in life, I think it could be explored exceptionally. Now on to some general thoughts for these volumes. The exam arc, I actually think that might have been one of my least favorite arcs within Frieren up through the end of the anime. So I it's not that I had a bitter taste in my mouth, because it's not like it was terrible or anything like that, but I kind of wanted to return to some of the back and forth between having these smaller stories, these borderline short stories, and then every now and then having bigger arcs. And I feel like we got to return to that within these volumes. And so it felt so nice to come back to that, because not only did it feel like coming home as far as coming back to Frieren, but it also felt like coming home to what makes Frieren special. So I really, really enjoyed that we got that within these volumes. I also found that the thematic elements that we're getting within, or at least that I think we're getting within these 3 volumes, are very much to my liking, and the implications, at the very least, are interesting, even if it goes in a completely different direction than what I'm currently guessing. I'm still very excited to see the direction that it takes, because I think it is quite fascinating. And I like that we're starting to get a little bit more of some of the side characters that we've seen, that we're exploring them a little bit, because the exam arc introduced a lot of characters, so I like that we're starting to dive into some of them and get more depth with them within these 3 volumes. I am so excited to keep going, though. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen, but I'm also sad because by the time I get through volume 12, I'm basically caught up, and then I'm going to have to wait, and I'm like, oh, not another series that I gotta wait on, because it's like, oh, Apothecary Diaries, Witch Hat Atelier, Spy Family, it's like, oh, all the things I'm enjoying as of late are things that I have to wait for. But anyway, very happy to have finally gotten into the manga for this. And I haven't commented, because this is the first time I'm picking up the manga, I haven't commented on the art style and everything. I really like it. One of my favorite parts of the show was the music. So obviously we don't have that. And I wasn't sure, because it is like a crisp and colorful story, which once again, you don't really have the color used within the manga. So I was kind of curious to see, because the art style itself isn't necessarily the most elaborate. But I really like the art within Frieren. I think it's lovely, and occasionally when you do get them fighting, I actually feel like motion is captured really well, despite the fact that it's a still image. So I think that the artwork itself is great. It's not maybe playing around with paneling the way you get in something like Witch Hat Atelier, but I don't need everything to do that, because that's very unique and special in its own way. But I really like the artwork in this, so I'm really excited to keep going, and I'm sad simultaneously to get caught up with this. But if you have some thoughts that are spoilery, just make sure to write spoilers and then enter a few times so that nobody who happens to glance at the comments is spoiled. And then if you would like to see more Frieren content, I'll have my playlist linked. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.